Today, we're going to listen to the story of Hannibal, told in his own words. A time when legend and history intertwine, and one man dares to challenge the might of the Roman Empire. But if you think Hannibal was just another general in history books, you may want to hear from him directly, the man who crossed the Alps with elephants and terrorized Rome on its own soil. Before we begin, take a moment to like and subscribe before you gently drift into a happy sleep. It helps us grow and continue creating meaningful stories like this one. And let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from and if you have any suggestions to improve our videos. We truly love hearing from you. Now, relax. Close your eyes if you wish. Our videos are crafted like audio biographies, made to be enjoyed even without watching the screen. Just let the words wash over you. The gentle sound of crackling fire at the end will accompany you into sleep in case you forget to turn off the video. From a young age, Hannibal swore never to be a friend of Rome. That oath became his guiding star, leading him through one of the boldest and most extraordinary campaigns in military history. In 218 BCE, Hannibal embarked on an epic march from Spain to the Italian peninsula, crossing the Pyrenees and the Alps with an army that included 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. This feat, considered impossible by his contemporaries, proved his daring and determination. Once in Italy, Hannibal dealt devastating defeats to the Romans at the Trebia River, Lake Trasimene, and most famously at Cannae, where he surrounded and nearly annihilated a Roman army that vastly outnumbered his own. This victory cemented his legend and posed a serious threat to the very existence of Rome. Yet despite his extraordinary triumphs, Hannibal never managed to break Rome's will. In this video, we'll relive Hannibal's exploits, explore his battles, his strategies, and the legacy he left behind, a journey through the story of a man who, with audacity and resolve, dared the impossible. And now, let's immerse ourselves in a new journey through the words of Hannibal himself. Through cruel snows and the whispering winds, I, Hannibal, son of Hamilcar, marched toward the shadow of Rome. Each step upon the ice, each crack beneath my soldiers' feet, every silent glance from my elephants, all of it was a tribute to the oath I had taken as a child, when my father's calloused hands gripped mine and made me speak words that still burn on my lips. Eternal hatred for Rome. Not blind hatred, not a whim, a vow for life. It was the hatred of justice, of vengeance, of wounded dignity. My father had seen our great Carthage humiliated, crushed under the weight of gold paid to the victors, its ships burned, its fleet disgraced. And I had sworn a sacred oath. Saguntum was the first step. Not just any city, but a symbol, allied to the Romans, yes, but within our sphere, our Iberia. I could not tolerate that interference, that insult. The siege lasted months. I still remember the smoke rising from the fallen towers, the clash of catapults, the cries of the last defenders as they fell on the walls, the faces of my men blackened with soot and thirsting for victory. When Saguntum fell, I did not rejoice. There was no triumph in that victory. It was only the beginning of something vaster, crueler, greater than myself. I knew Rome would respond. I knew they would send legions to Iberia, to Africa. But I had a design, a plan the world would remember for centuries. I would not wait. I would not defend. I would bring war to their heart, to the heart of Italy. And so we set out. 46,000 men, dozens of elephants, and a will as unyielding as the steel of our swords. The Alps loomed before us like a wall of sleeping giants. The peaks were covered in snow, the sky pressed down upon the earth. And yet I knew I had to cross them. My officers murmured. The men, many of them young, were afraid. But I looked at the mountains as a challenge, not as a boundary. The days of the crossing are etched into my soul like grooves in marble. Gallic tribes attacked our flanks like wolves upon a weary flock. Rocks crumbled beneath our feet. The cold clung to our skin, cut through flesh, stole our breath. Some soldiers died in their sleep from the cold, curled up beside their comrades like children seeking warmth. Others, blinded by snow and despair, threw themselves into the void. The elephants, those noble creatures, massive beasts I had brought as symbols of our might, fell like felled trees, some slipping into ravines, others crushed by a cold they were never meant to endure. Many perished, and when one of them roared before dying, it felt as if the mountain itself wept. I too was struck by the cold. My hands, numb, struggled to hold the reins of my horse. Yet every night by the fire, I looked my men in the eyes, spoke. I told them of what awaited beyond those peaks. Fertile lands, peoples ready to rise against Rome, glorious battles, unimaginable spoils. I set their spirits alight with words. I led them with my gaze, with my presence. I had to be their flame because without it they would fade. When, at the end of October, we reached Cisalpine Gaul, we were 26,000. Less than half of those who had set out, but those 26,000 were forged of steel, shaped by pain, by loss, by exhaustion. And I had become something else. No longer just a commander. I was a symbol, a war leader, a shadow over the heart of Rome. Looking south, I breathed deeply. The air was warmer, and the scent of grass and mud brought me back to life. We had crossed an icy hell, and we were ready to invade. The legions did not expect this. They believed Carthage would defend, not attack. They could not imagine that one man could possess the madness, the courage, and the strength to cross the Alps peaks over 2,500 meters high with an army. But I had done it. Not for personal glory, not only for my father's oath, but for the very survival of my people. Rome knows no truce, no peace. Either they are bent or they are broken. And so, with 26,000 souls, shattered but resolute, and the few elephants that remained beasts that seemed like monsters summoned from the bowels of the earth, we began our march toward the heart of Italy. I did not sleep at night. I thought of the comrades lost in the snow, the mothers who had sent their sons with me, the hope that burned in my chest like live coals. But I did not tremble. I did not waver. My heart was stone forged in the furnace of hatred and will. That war was only beginning. And I, Hannibal Barca, was ready to write every page of it with blood and steel pages that would remain etched in the memory of mankind. Blood mingled with dust. The bitter smell of toil, of iron, of skin scorched by the sun was our daily bread. We slept little. We always marched. But I saw them one by one, those men who had crossed the Alps with me, who had endured hunger, frost, death, and who now gripped their weapons with a fury that surpassed mere survival. It was loyalty. It was trust. It was a bond stronger than blood. At the beginning, they were nothing more than a motley gathering of cultures, languages, and customs. Africans, men from my own land, accustomed to heat and desert, to silent discipline. Iberians, fierce and proud, wild in their movements, yet extraordinary. In hand-to-hand combat, there were Celtiberians, agile and untamed. The Balearic slingers, hurling their deadly projectiles with surgical precision. And the Lusitanians, able to endure any hardship, cunning and tenacious like the serpents of their mountains. Speaking with them was often impossible, but the language of war was universal, and I knew it well. At first, they looked at me with suspicion. To many, I was just a foreign commander, barking orders in a language few understood. But I did not lead with words alone, I stood with them. I ate with my men, marched with them, mourned their dead. I was not above them. I was one of them. In battle, my sword was at their side. During the marches, my pace matched theirs. In moments of doubt, my gaze was steady, and so the multitude became unity. Confusion turned into order. We all had one enemy, Rome, and my hatred for Rome burned like a beacon for those wandering souls. My hatred fed them, strengthened them. I didn't need to shout. One look from me was enough, and they gathered around me like a single body. We had suffered too much together to be merely an army. We were brothers. Once we reached northern Italy, we found new allies. The Gauls. They were tired of the Roman yoke, tired of paying tribute, tired of watching their sons taken away. They came to us like floodwaters, bringing men, weapons, horses, and an ancient hatred. In them, I saw the same fire that burned within me. I welcomed them. I embraced them like rebellious sons, and I turned them into disciplined soldiers. With that army, with that living, breathing machine born of pain and will, I struck the Romans where they least expected it. At the river Ticino, we were the lightning bolt that split the calm sky of their arrogance. I remember the thunder of hooves trampling the legions, the shock in their eyes used to commanding, never obeying. At the river Trebbia, I lured them into the freezing water, left them exhausted and chilled, then surrounded them like a serpent crushing its prey. At Lake Trasimene, the fog became my ally. My men emerged like phantoms, and in that lake, the water turned red with the dye of Roman cloaks. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I wanted a blow that would shatter their backbone. I wanted a wound so deep it would make the very foundations of Rome tremble. And so, we pushed farther south. It was the summer of 216 BC, the time of the Romans, and the sun flooded Apulia with a blinding light. We arrived near a small village, Cannae, a name then insignificant, but destined to become eternal. I remember that land, yellow, flat, swept by wind. The stalks of grain swaying in the warm breeze looked like waves on a golden sea, and there, on that field, I decided Rome would come to know fear. Not caution, not doubt, pure terror. My men were ready. I watched them, felt the tension in their bodies, but it wasn't fear. It was focus. They were silent, composed like predators before the hunt. They trusted me. They looked at me, and they were ready to die. That trust was a burden I carried like an invisible cloak. Every order, every maneuver was a choice upon which thousands of lives depended. And yet, I did not tremble. Within me, a sharp, calm clarity guided me. I saw the battlefield as a grand strategic game, but also as a tragic stage. And I knew how to lead the dance of death. The enemy was vast, arrogant, certain of victory. They believed brute force, sheer numbers, would be enough. But I would embrace them, trap them in a deadly circle. Their very advance would lead them to ruin. In the days before the battle, I walked among the tents. I listened to the different tongues mingling, the laughter, the prayers. Some sang, others sharpened blades. I loved those soldiers, all of them like brothers. Each carried a different world within, yet all had chosen to follow me. I could never fail them. The dawn of Cannae approached. The sky was clear, the wind warm. I donned my helmet, wrapped my hands around my sword. I looked at my army, my creation, my family. Words were unnecessary. They knew. I knew. And as the drums began to beat the rhythm of battle, I felt my heart pounding in my chest like a sacred drum. This was not just war. This was history. And I, Hannibal Barca, was about to write it in blood. The sun was already high, merciless, when they told me that Varro had taken supreme command. An arrogant move, but predictable. The Romans are like that. When they think themselves strong, they lose their heads. And Varro, blinded by pride, ignored the counsel of his colleague, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a man who knew my name, my victories, and perhaps deep down smelled the scent of the trap. But ambition claims more victims than swords ever will. And so, with blind fury, Varro brought 86,000 men to the northern bank of the Aufidus River. 86,000. An enormous mass, menacing, unstoppable, or so it seemed. I watched them from afar, from the crest of a low hill. And I felt no fear, no hesitation. That quiet river, that plain scorched by the summer wind, would become a sanctuary, not of prayer, but an altar of blood. I had 50,000 men. I knew them, almost each one of them, their gestures, their accents, their silences. Every day and night spent together had carved between us a bond stronger than iron. I knew what they could do, and I knew that if I was worthy of their trust, together we would become a storm. That morning, I breathed deep. The wind carried the dry scent of broken grain and warm dust. Along the lines, my officers spoke softly to the soldiers. The Gauls prepared with fury in their eyes, their beards caked in dirt, as was their custom. The Iberians gripped their spears with calloused fingers, their movements sharp and fluid like predators. The Africans stood still, armor gleaming under the sun, ready to close the trap when the time came. I walked among them, but the words died in my throat. There was nothing more to say, only to fight. Yet every gaze I met spoke to me. We are with you. And I thought, may the gods not abandon me today. Varro arranged his army in great depth, hoping to break us with brute frontal force. The classic Roman maneuver. They didn't know us yet. They didn't understand that this depth would be their grave. I arranged my troops with cunning. Light infantry in the center, flexible Gauls and Iberians, the flanks shielded by cavalry. On the left, Ibero-Gallic horsemen. On the right, my Numidians, swift, unpredictable, deadly. The drums thundered. The weapons glinted like mad mirrors in the sun. The Roman war cries rose like crashing waves. And then, silence. The silence before the storm, the world holding its breath. And then, the battle began. The Romans advanced like a solid wall, a single creature made of flesh and metal. The center of my formation gave way, deliberately. The Gauls and Iberians fell back struggling, sweating but in good order. The Romans pressed on, again and again. They believed they had won, but I was there, and each of their steps forward was a step toward the abyss. When they were deep enough, when their flanks lay exposed, I gave the signal. The Numidian cavalry struck the Roman left flank, then swept into their rear. Meanwhile, my Iberian Gallic cavalry, led by men who feared nothing, had already overrun the enemy's right wing. And I closed the trap. From the center, like a bow that bends and then tightens, my men began to press inward. The wings folded, enveloped. The legionaries, packed together like animals in a pen, had no room to move. The screams changed tone. They were no longer battle cries. They were cries of fear. I, Hannibal, son of Hamilcar, watched them suffocate. There, under the scorching sun of Apulia, I saw Roman pride writhe and dissolve. I saw their standards fall, one after another, as the earth turned scarlet. They asked me later if I had felt pleasure. No, it was not pleasure. It was the fulfillment of years of pain, struggle, and sacrifice. The Roman commander Lucius Aemilius Paulus fell in the field, struck down, overwhelmed. Varro managed to flee, but his escape did not erase the disgrace. 80,000 soldiers, over 60,000 dead. The bodies piled like stones after an earthquake. I walked among the remains in the silence that follows the storm. My men were exhausted but alive. Some wept, not for the enemy, but for the fallen comrades and for the disbelief of still being alive. I stopped and looked at the sky, my hands stained with blood, my heart still pounding like a drum. We had done the impossible, and we had done it together. In that moment, I did not think of glory nor of the future. I thought only of my father's voice, who taught me never to bend. And in that burning wind, I heard a whisper, "Don't stop." But on that day, August 2nd, on the banks of the Ofanto, the world had seen what the will of one man and the courage of an army that believes in its cause can do. Rome had looked death in the eye and had seen my face. I walked across the field. I passed heaps of corpses, pools of congealed blood, shattered helmets. The smell was the acrid stench of hot flesh, of fresh death, and in that ghostly silence, a thought cut through me like a blade. We have won, but at what cost? Meanwhile, in Rome, the news struck like lightning. Panic spread through the streets. Mothers wept for sons who would never return. Senators trembled in their seats. For the first time, the capital of the Republic felt naked, exposed, defenseless. So terrified were they that they offered sacrifices to the gods' gods who perhaps had already abandoned them. Rome, proud and rational, bent to fear like a primitive people. But I, Hannibal, sacrificed no one. I had already given enough. My youth, my distant homeland, my brothers in arms. That day at Cannae was not merely a victory. It was an open wound in the belly of the world. A proof that even the most arrogant empire can fall if it faces a man who refuses to back down. And as the sunset set the horizon ablaze, I stood alone for a moment in the center of the battlefield, with blood beneath my feet and silence all around me. I did not pray. I did not rejoice. I closed my eyes, and I breathed. Evening fell slowly over the blood-soaked plain of Cannae, while the fires of my camps lit one by one like earthly stars. The wind still carried the echo of the dying's moans, and the metallic scent of blood mingled with dust. Yet, at the heart of that immense victory, I walked in silence, restless. I had defeated the entire Roman army. I had surrounded it, crushed it, destroyed it. Rome's youth lay beneath my feet. My men, Iberians, Africans, Gauls, Numidians, looked at me as one looks upon a god descended to earth. And I, Hannibal, son of Hamilcar, did not feel invincible. I felt empty that night, as the moon rose over the Ofanto, and even the cicadas fell silent as if the earth itself held its breath. Many of my officers came to me. "Let's march on Rome," they said. "Now, at once, before they rise again." I listened, one by one. Faces marked by battle, feverish eyes, voices heavy with excitement and vengeance. Rome was vulnerable. It had been brought to its knees. The final blow was within reach. All it would take was to extend a hand. And yet I did not extend it. It was not cowardice. It never was. I had faced the impossible, defied nature and the gods, led armies across the Alps, stared death in the eye 100 times without looking away. But I knew war, and I knew Rome. I knew what it meant to besiege a city like that. It was not a battle, it was a long attrition. High walls, solid and unbroken, impregnable defenses, bronze gates, troops still stationed in allied cities. And I had no siege equipment, no towers, no battering rams, no ballistae. Carthage had not supplied them. I had not asked. My strategy was not one of siege, but of maneuver, of lightning strikes, of panic sown like a plague. Rome was not merely a political center. It was an idea, a bastion of pride. They would not surrender it without fighting to their last breath, to their last man. I could have approached, yes. Struck fear, made the walls tremble with the mere shadow of my army. But then there would come days, weeks, months of attrition. And my men were tired. Their strength was spent. The spoils weighed heavier than their swords, and winter was coming. In my heart, I felt it. It was not the time. What we had achieved at Cannae was greater than any material conquest. We had shattered the Romans' sense of certainty. We had ripped out their heart. Their people, their legions, their senate now all trembled at the mere sound of my name. That was the true siege. Rome was encircled by fear. I wondered, in those hours of solitude, whether my choice would ever be understood. Whether one day I would be called a madman for not marching on Rome. But I did not fight for the praise of historians, nor for the vanity of a spectacular conquest. I fought for a deeper, subtler victory, a political, cultural, and strategic triumph. My enemies will write that I was afraid, that I hesitated. But they do not know what it means to carry the fate of an entire civilization on one's shoulders. They do not know how heavy every step becomes, when thousands of lives hang on the edge of your clarity. And so I made my decision. Rome would live another day, but it would never be the same. In the days that followed, I reorganized the army. I strengthened alliances with the Italic peoples who chafed under Rome's yoke. The Gauls offered me warriors. Some cities opened their gates. With each passing day, Rome lost something: men, allies, prestige. It was a silent conquest, but relentless. I had turned Italy into a wasteland for my enemies. Every village, every road could become a trap. I did not need to crush Rome beneath the force of my catapults. I had already made its foundations tremble, and yet each night when the camp fell silent and the stars danced above the plains of Apulia, I would think back to that moment. The crossroads, the breath held between the assault and the wait. I chose the wait. I chose the long war. I chose to haunt Rome like a shadow, like a recurring nightmare that cannot be killed. And deep in my heart, even in the silence of those nights, I knew the worst nightmare is the one whose next strike you cannot foresee. No one, save the gods, knows the weight of hope I carried within me every day, from the moment Roman blood flooded the soil of Cannae. It was not military victory alone that I sought. It was the fracture, the deep crack that would bring down Roman dominance not by force, but by erosion. I believed that after Cannae, Italy itself would speak with a new voice, that the peoples long bent under Rome's oppression would rise and march with me. I hoped they would see in me not just the destroyer of the invincible legion, but a liberator. And for a moment, that dream seemed to take shape. Capua, splendid and powerful, chose to open its gates to me. It welcomed me not as a guest, but as an ally, as a king. Capua was no ordinary prize. It was the beating heart of Italy after Rome. Its walls, its wealth, its strategic position, all made it a safe refuge and a strong base. There, among its palaces and avenues, I pitched my camp, not as an invader, but as a future builder of a new order. My men could finally rest, eat, and tend to their wounds. But rest was not what I sought. I was waiting, a feverish waiting. Every morning I woke up asking myself, who will betray Rome today? Who will join our cause? Every day I hoped the ambassadors of the Umbrians, the Piceni, the Samnites would come to my camp. But the silence was heavy. Capua stood alone. Some villages, some minor communities did join us, it's true, but nothing that could truly change the course of fate. I was tormented by the question, why don't they rebel? What more do they need to see? What more must I do to make them understand that Rome is vulnerable, that Rome can fall? I had shown them blood, defeat, the power of my strategy. Yet they remained anchored, bound by invisible chains, fear, tradition, resignation. Rome had forged them through centuries of discipline and terror, and now, even when wounded, they still served her. Meanwhile, the Romans, cunning as serpents slipping by unnoticed, changed their approach. They gave up direct confrontation, the terrain favorable to me. They avoided clashes, but never ceased to strike where they could, with small attacks, ambushes, targeted operations. They didn't seek glory. They sought survival, and that made them much more dangerous. I, on the other hand, looked south. If Rome would not fall from within, I had to strike it from without. The city of Tarentum, with its port, its history, its strategic position, was the key. There, Finally, I could receive the reinforcements promised by Philip V of Macedon, who was fighting in the heart of the Balkans against the Romans. With his naval power, we would break the isolation the Romans sought to impose on me. I marched towards Tarentum like a man chasing a vision. Every step carried hope and doubt. I had seen my plans wear down against Rome's blind resistance, and I knew that in Tarentum, too, nothing was certain. But the city was restless, and some of its men were with me at heart, if not yet openly. In 212 BC, after months of secret negotiations, conspiracies, waiting and illusions, it happened. A pro-Carthaginian faction opened the gates for us. We entered. Tarentum was ours. Or at least, so it seemed. Because even then, Rome knew how to resist. Like a beast that retreats but does not die, it held on to the fortress of the harbor. A stab in the side of my conquest. A stain on an incomplete victory. That stronghold, controlled by the Romans, prevented the Macedonian reinforcements from arriving safely. The sea access, the hope of a bridge to the east, was mutilated. Yet I was there, inside the city of Tarentum, in Capua, in Italy. My banners flew over lands that had never before seen the sun of Carthage. I had sown terror, but also anticipation. My troops still followed me, tired but loyal. The nights were colder, the days harsher, but the flame did not die out. I walked under the arcades of Capua, along the docks of Tarentum, listening to the murmurs of the people. Sometimes I heard my name spoken as hope, other times as a curse, but always with respect. No one could deny that I had shown what no one had ever dared to imagine, that Rome could be defeated, annihilated. Yet every evening, sitting before my map, looking at the roads of Italy like veins in a mighty body, I understood that something was still missing. A gesture, an ally, a revolt, something to break the balance, because alone, even the wisest general cannot extinguish the fire burning in the nation if the people do not hand him the fuel. I, Hannibal, had bent Rome, but I had not broken it. Not yet. The year the sky turned grey over Capua was the year doubt sat beside me. Until then, I had marched with steady steps, with a vision as clear as the sunlight over the mountains. But 212 BC, that cursed year of shattered choices, found me at a crossroads. And it was then that, for the first time since I set foot in Italy, my heart did not know which path to point to. Capua, my proudest ally, my crown in the Italic conquest, let out a cry. The Roman legions had moved like ravenous dogs and had laid siege to its walls. 4 legions. Not an isolated attempt, not a raid, but a precise strike at my most exposed flank. And that city, which had welcomed me when Rome trembled after Cannae, now stood alone, besieged, betrayed by fate. At the same time, I looked to Tarentum. The Roman fortress still resisted by the harbor, the key for the reinforcements promised from Macedonia, the breath of a future still possible. The south was my hope. But Capua was the symbol, and I was bound to it by a pact of blood, honor, and necessity. I shut myself in the tent, the maps before me, messengers waiting outside, my generals with eyes fixed on me. But no one could decide for me. No one could feel the weight of those Capuan eyes, women, elders, warriors looking at me across the distance like children to a father who promised them salvation. I was torn, If I left Tarentum, my conquest could vanish. If I abandoned Capua, my credibility, my influence, everything I had built among the Italic cities would crack. My prestige, so firm until then, could dissolve like mist in the sun. Rome, ever ready to exploit every crack, would spread the poison of doubt among my allies. So I chose a middle way, a cowardly path, perhaps, or perhaps simply human. I sent Hannibal, my trusted officer, with reinforcements to Capua, while I stayed in Tarentum to continue the pressure on the fortress. It was not a choice that gave me peace. And at night, in dreams, I saw the Carthaginian torches dimming at the gates of Capua, while the Roman eagles rose triumphantly. Then, the news. My heart froze. Nerone had been defeated. The Romans had repelled our men, broken the resistance, and tightened the siege like a serpent around the city's throat. Despair made itself felt and knocked at my door. I had to act. I had to be the leader I had always demanded of myself. If Capua fell, so too would the dream of a rebellious Italy. If the Capuans were left alone to die, who would still believe that Hannibal would protect them? No one follows a king who does not defend his own. No one shakes the hand of one who has already let it slip once. I gathered my army. The march to Capua was swift, feverish. My men understood the weight of every step. It was not just a city. It was the stake of the entire Italian campaign. The roads boiled beneath our feet, and the sun beat down on our helmets as if even the gods wanted to pin me to my choice. When I reached the outskirts of Capua, I learned the Romans had not yet withdrawn. So, I feigned what they feared most: a march on Rome. It was not the capital I wanted, not yet. But I wanted my enemies to believe I would take it, that I was mad or bold enough to try. Rome, with its mighty walls and its beating heart of power, was still untouchable. But if I could scare them, make them believe my army was about to storm the Urbs, perhaps, just perhaps, they would abandon Capua to rush to defend their dying mother. I marched toward Rome not to conquer it, but to evoke terror. Every day I hoped the Roman legions besieging Capua would receive orders to return, to loosen their grip on my ally, to protect their cradle. But those damned dogs did not budge. They didn't take the bait. They didn't fall into the trap. I hated them for it. I respected them. Only Rome could be so stubborn, so cunning. They stood firm, solid, tenacious like stones. And I, who had played so many times with deceit, tasted the bitter flavor of my own weapon turned against me. Capua was still under siege. I was still far away, and my army, powerful as it was, could not divide again. My heart broke. My prestige, my name, my dream all began to crack. Not because I had been defeated on the battlefield, but because I had lost my grip on the instinct of the peoples. And that, for a commander, is worse than death. That evening, sitting beside the fire, I said nothing. My men looked at me, but no one dared speak a word. Capua was dying. And I, Hannibal Barca, felt that from that day forward, my war would be harder. Not just against Rome, but against time, against indifference, against the betrayal of fate. The spring of 211 BC brought with it a different wind. Not the brisk, lively wind I had known crossing the Alpine passes or leading my cavalry across the plain of Trasimene. No, It was a heavy, tired wind, swollen with omens. I felt it on my skin, like the sweat of a warrior who knows he's fighting uphill, and Rome. Rome trembled, yes, but it did not yield. I had again approached the herbs, bringing with me the shadow of my fame and the echo of my victories. But the city was no longer the frightened beast I had seen after Cannae. It had learned to resist, like a wounded and proud bull that no longer charges blindly, but digs the ground with its hoof, waiting for the right moment. And behind those walls were not only armed men, but an indomitable will led by a cunning old man, Fabius Maximus. He did not seek glory. He did not want immediate triumph. He only wanted to see me wear down. He wanted time to consume me more than his swords. When Rome trembled at my approach, he spoke to the people and the Senate like a priest before the altar. Jupiter will protect us. And Rome believed it. Rome the superstitious, the solemn one, the city that made sacrifices to appease the gods, found strength in faith not to open its gates to me. And as if the gods truly heard their prayers, the sky opened not to let the sun through, but to unleash the fury of storms. Lightning, rain, mud, the world itself seemed to rise against me. My horses sank into the soaked earth. The baggage trains got stuck. The provisions rotted. My army, already worn out after years in hostile land, began to lose its hunger for war. I could not stay. I had hoped to force the Romans' hand, to make them fight for their capital, to distract them from Capua. But no one left their posts. No legion moved from that city. My bluff was discovered, or perhaps worse still, ignored. I approached again. Once more. Rome. I saw it in the distance, veiled by the dawn mist, like a mirage I had chased for years, and which now, finally, revealed itself before my eyes. Only 3 miles away, 3 miles yet an abyss. The Ponte Salario stood there, within reach of my cavalry, and every man at my side held his breath. We heard only the sound of hooves on cobblestones, armor scraping, breaths held as if the very air had become sacred or cursed. This was not my war. I had never wanted it to be about walls to break down, long waits, hunger, and attrition. I was the storm, the sudden flame, the steel striking the exposed flank. I had beaten Rome at Cannae, where cunning triumphed over brute force, where the battlefield became my canvas, and the bodies of my enemies, the colors with which I painted defeat. But Rome refused to die, and I truly understood that only that morning with its distant, still cold towers. With the Senate, as my spies told me, convened as on any ordinary day, with the elders sitting and talking, while I, Hannibal, was at the city's gates. They did not come out to meet me. They did not plead. They sent no ambassadors. Rome did not tremble, or if it did, it was in the heart, in silence. But it showed the world an impassive face, as if my presence were irrelevant, as if I were just a passing storm destined to fade away. And yet, panic was there. I saw it in the faces of peasants fleeing with their children on their backs. I heard it in the cries of women, the shouts of men locking themselves indoors or fleeing to the hills. Rome felt my presence, and for an eternal instant its heart beat stronger, faster. But I did not have the means to truly strike it. I had no siege engines, no towers, no battering rams. I had cavalry, cunning, speed. That was not enough. I had hoped my march on Rome would break the siege of Capua. I hoped the consuls, seized by panic, would withdraw the legions to defend the capital. But it did not happen. Neither Fabius Maximus nor Galba moved. My move, elegant in theory, failed in practice. Not because of a miscalculation, but because of that damned Roman stubbornness, their innate ability to resist even when all logic said they should be defeated. So I retreated, not out of cowardice, but out of clarity. I had pillaged the territories around the city, gathered loot, devastated the countryside. My army had gained something at least materially, but strategically we had lost. Capua was not safe. Capua was dying. On the way back, we encountered the consul Publius Sulpicius Galba Maximus. Finally, a battle. Finally, Roman blood on my steel. We defeated him as before, as always. But by then, even victories left a bitter aftertaste, because I understood they were blows struck on a giant that does not fall, but learns. And each blow made Rome stronger, more cunning. When I reached Campania, Capua was on the brink of surrender. Its nobles wrote me letters filled with despair, pleas, promises. But I could no longer help them. Not with what I had. Not with an exhausted army, devoid of reinforcements in hostile territory. Deep down, they knew it too. They knew the Carthaginian dream in Italy was fading, like morning mist slowly dissolving under the sun. Capua opened its gates, not because it betrayed me, but because it had lost hope. It believed foolishly in Rome's mercy, but Rome forgives nothing. The news reached me like axe blows. Nobles executed, inhabitants sold off, streets washed with the blood of the guilty, or of those who had only dared to imagine a different fate. Capua reduced to an agricultural village, ruled by a prefect. From Queen of the South, it became a servant. Rome's revenge was total, and the message was clear. No one would ever dare change banners again. No one would ever be deluded into seeing Carthage as a liberator. The fear Rome etched into the hearts of the Italian peoples was not the terror of a lost battle, but the indelible mark of absolute dominion. I, Hannibal, had brought war to their heart. I had made their walls tremble. I had changed history. But my shadow was beginning to fade. Yet I felt no shame, nor remorse, only a deep bitterness, the bitter taste of clarity. I had given everything. I had dared what no one else had ever tried. I had crossed impossible paths, fought legendary battles, written my name on the face of history. But it was not enough. Not against Rome. Not then. In the 10th year of my campaign in Italy, my gaze rose more often to the sky than to the enemy plains, asking the gods, bitterly, where the fury of my war had gone. I was still alive. My army breathed, marched, fought. But the war seemed to have crystallized, like a river flowing slowly beneath winter's ice. I could no longer strike as before. The great offensives, those strokes of genius that had made Rome tremble, were now denied to me. It was not will nor courage that failed me, but the ground beneath my feet had grown barren. The roads that once opened before me now closed, hostile. The cities no longer rebelled. The peasants brought me no grain, no hope, and my men began to doubt silently, like a fire that dies without oxygen. The Romans, stubborn as rocks against the sea, had learned. Fabius Maximus, that old fox, had taught them to resist without fighting, to wear me down, to force me to bite the air, never the flesh. They no longer came to the field seeking glory. They avoided direct clash, yet surrounded me. Like ivy, they tightened slowly, choking my army's breath with small but continuous cuts. Every hill, every well, every road was contested. Every sack of grain weighed like a spear. And so, day after day, the war became a war of attrition. And I, Hannibal, the lightning bolt of Africa, was reduced to fighting with patience, a virtue I had never sought, and which was now imposed on me. I remember those months as one remembers confused dreams, a succession of conflicting news, hopes that flickered and died in the same breath. We had taken Tarentum, a strategic city, a port, a gateway to the sea, but the fortress, that cursed fortress, remained in Roman hands, like a hostile heart that keeps beating inside the body of a man who believes himself dead. I no longer had the strength, nor the resources. And while I brushed against Rome without touching it, from another gate, its armies were marching towards Spain. It was a cruel mockery, and I was aware of it. The news coming from Spain were like thin blades. After the death of Publius and Gnaeus Scipio, we believed the legions were finished, that the peninsula would return to us. But Rome, once again, had pulled a commander out of nowhere, a certain Lucius Marcius, a man without name, without fame, but enough to snatch victory from our clenched fists. It was as if fortune herself had become an impartial referee. She gave us a grip, only to take another away. Rome lost Tarentum, but held the fortress. I took loot and terrified Rome, but lost Capua. They mourned their generals in Spain, but found others. I had reached their walls, but had not left the mark I hoped for. Everything balanced out. Everything remained suspended. And in that suspension, fatigue grew, not only of bodies, but of souls. My men looked more and more often toward the south, toward home. The horses were lean, the supplies scarce. The Italic peoples, who once saw in me their liberation, closed themselves again in silence, in waiting. Who would help us now? Philip of Macedonia was moving, yes, but with the slowness of a cautious king. The Aetolians, Attalus, the allies, words, promises, hopes as thin as smoke. I myself began to ask, where is this war leading? Is it still possible to bend Rome? Or is it she who is shaping me, day after day, battle after battle? Yet I did not yield. I did not yield, because deep down, even in the most uncertain moment, hope remained alive. Titus Livius was right, if ever a Roman could understand the enemy's heart. That was the moment when no one knew anymore who the victor was, nor if a vanquished even existed. It was as if the war had to begin again, once more, from that exact point. Every future battle would be decisive. Every choice heavy with weight, every step a risk. But I was Hannibal, and as long as my breath filled my lungs, as long as the sound of my drums made the earth tremble, I would continue. Because the war, the true war, was not yet over. The fate of Capua tormented me deeply. It was not just a city, but the beating heart of my fragile dominion in southern Italy, a light risking to be extinguished under the relentless assault of the Romans. What anguished me most was the growing distance of the peoples of those lands from us. It was as if the wind of fear and distrust blowing from Capua was putting out the ardor of the alliances I had painstakingly built. Every day I felt the weight of this disappointment stronger, like a blade piercing my hopes. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. How to keep the loyalty of those peoples without weakening my military strength? To distribute garrisons in the Allied cities would be a fatal choice. I would fragment my army, reducing each group to a small, vulnerable garrison, easy prey for a coordinated attack by the Roman legions. But on the other hand, if I withdrew the troops, I would abandon the cities and, with them, the trust of the Allies, opening the way for their defection from our ranks. It was a trap, a strategic prison from which it seemed impossible to escape unscathed. Thus, with a heavy heart, I made a cruel but, in my view, necessary decision to sack those cities I could not defend. To destroy what we could not hold meant leaving the Romans only ruins, smoke and desolation, depriving them of resources and shelter. A ruthless strategy, perhaps, but born of desperation and the need to slow the enemy's advance. Every shattered stone, every burned house, every devastated field was an arrow aimed at Rome, a message that we would fight to the last breath. In that very year, the war continued to unfold its cruel dance. We won another victory at Herdnaia, where I defeated a proconsular army. Yet that victory, while bringing honor and glory to my men, did not change the course of the war. Rome, stubborn and unyielding, continued to move its pieces on the board with patience and determination. Quintus Fabius Maximus, a man I already knew for his cunning and perseverance, at nearly 70 years old, ventured to conquer Tarentum. It was a heavy blow. The city fell and 30,000 of its inhabitants were captured. It was 209 BC. Rome now held 10 of its 21 active legions, about 100,000 armed citizens and as many allies. Samnium and Lucania were slowly slipping from our hands, piece by piece. The Roman grip tightened, and I saw the fabric of my alliances unraveling more and more. Every loss weighed on my spirit like a millstone. In 208 BC, the new consuls appeared. Marcus Claudius Marcellius, who had already earned the title Sword of Rome, thanks to the conquest of Syracuse, and Titus Quinctius Crispinus. They seemed determined to end my rule in Italy with a decisive open field attack, while my army was camped at Venosa. But once again, fate smiled upon me, and my experience in war proved superior to their ambition. I carefully prepared an ambush, a deception woven like a spider's web around them. When the two consuls fell into the trap, the battle turned into a massacre for the Romans. Marcellus fell on the field, his blood staining the earth like a red warning, and Crispinus was mortally wounded. Without their commanders, the Roman legions scattered, disorganized and demoralized. My heart felt a mix of pride and sorrow. Pride for having won once more, sorrow for the trail of death the war left behind. Every fallen name among ours, every life broken, weighed on my shoulders like a yoke. I wasted no time and marched immediately to Locri, in the heart of Brutium, where Roman forces were attempting a siege. My presence was a blade that broke their will. I scattered them like leaves in the wind, and captured their commander, Lucius Cincius Alimentus, a Roman who would become a historian. This small victory was a little light in the night of my campaign, a sign that we still had the strength to resist. The campaign of 208 thus ended with a success for me, a rare moment of respite in a war that seemed endless. But inside, I knew every victory was only a fragile piece in a larger battle, a sea of fire and blood that threatened to swallow me whole. I knew mine was a struggle against a relentless enemy, that fortune would not always be on my side, but my soul still burned. My mind kept searching for a way to turn the tide, to rekindle the flame of rebellion in southern Italy, and to lead my army to final victory. In those silent nights when the camp was wrapped in darkness and only the crackling of the fire broke the silence, I reflected on my choices, on the paths taken and those abandoned. War had taught me to be ruthless with myself, not to indulge in regret. But the human heart, even that of a commander, could not help but feel the weight of losses. I knew the game was still open, that the Romans would have no peace until they had brought me down, and I had no intention of yielding without fighting to my last breath. So, while the winds of war blew fiercely and the future remained uncertain, I prepared once again my army, my heart and my mind to face the next clash, hoping that the flame burning within me would never be extinguished. In 207 BC, a glimmer of hope lit up my heart like a long-awaited flame. Finally, after years of bloody struggles and exhausting hardships, it seemed the motherland, Carthage, had decided to send decisive aid. My brother Hasdrubal, with courage and determination, managed to challenge the youthful audacity of Publius Cornelius Scipio and crossed the Alps with an army determined to reunite with me in Italy. I felt a mix of joy and anxiety in my soul because I knew his presence could turn the tide of this endless war. From my position in Brutium, my heart full of expectation, we moved north with my army. I was rushing to meet my brother. The field stretched before us like a carpet of hopes and fears. My mind buzzed with plans and calculations, while my body felt the weight of years spent fighting under the scorching sun and pouring rains. The consul Gaius Claudius Nero, charged with stopping me, tried in vain to block my advance. His resistance was fierce but insufficient. At last, I reached Apulia, that harsh and wild land, ardently hoping for a reunion with my brother and his army. The silence that followed, however, was full of unease. The messengers I sent to communicate with Hasdrubal did not return. The Romans, cunning and ruthless, intercepted their steps and silenced my hopes. I remained in the dark about my brother's true intentions, and doubt began to creep into my mind. Trust wavered like a flickering flame in the wind, while the weight of the unknown grew ever more oppressive. Immobile in Apulia, watched and contained by the careful maneuvers of Consul Nero, I felt time slip away like sand through my fingers. Each day was torment, a seesaw of hopes and anguish. While I was held at bay, Nero divided his forces. One part remained to contain me, the other marched north to join the other consul, Livius Salinator. The news came like a thunderbolt, a pain that pierced my heart. My brother Hasdrubal had been defeated in the Battle of the Metaurus. His body had fallen, broken by the Roman blade, and his head, a cruel warning of defeat, was thrown into our camp, a macabre message that brought death to my face. When I learned of Hasdrubal's death, the world went silent around me. It was not the commander who bent, but the brother. I remember the moment they handed me that head, bloodied, thrown before my camp as an insult. My heart, which had withstood 1,000 battles, faltered. It was not only the flesh of my blood that had been severed, but the soul of my childhood, the companion of my games, the face I had looked to understand who I was. Hasdrubal was not just a soldier among many. He was my secret refuge, my living memory of home. We had shared bread, dreams, and fears children in the shadow of our father, then men under the burning sun of destiny. The thought that he faced that final battle alone, that he searched for me among the mountains, hoping for an embrace that never came, tears me apart. There is no glory in his death, only absence. No victory will ever fill the void he left. A silence dense with pain fell upon me. Time seemed to stop. Everything I had fought for, all the hopes I had nurtured, seemed to vanish in an instant. Hasdrubal's face, so much like mine, appeared before my eyes as a painful and heartbreaking shadow. Yet, I could not allow myself to succumb to despair. The war would not pause for mourning. My spirit, though wounded, was still that of a Carthaginian commander, hardened by battles and losses, but never broken. I had to keep fighting, to honor my brother's memory, and to keep alive the flame of resistance. Hasdrubal's head, thrown into our camp, was a cruel insult, an act of brutality that awakened in me a cold fury. It was not only the loss of a brother, but a symbol of the ruthless war Rome waged against us. It was a call to fight even harder, to leave nothing untried in response to that offense. The nights spent in camp were full of tormented thoughts. I relived every moment with my brother, his boldness, his determination, the shared dream of bringing victory to Carthage. And alongside those memories grew the awareness that my battle was becoming lonelier and my responsibility heavier. The weight of that loss seemed intent on crushing my spirit, yet within me burned a flame no defeat could extinguish. I had to be wiser, stronger, more determined, for now I was fighting not just for myself, but for the honor of a family and an entire people. The Romans believed they had broken my morale, shattered my will. And so, as the dust of battle settled and the tears of grief dried on my cheeks, I prepared my army once more. Though Carthage seemed distant and hopes appeared to fade, I would never bend my knee. Until the end, I would fight for Carthage, for my family, and for the dream of a victory that still burned distant, but not impossible. I remained in the mountains of Brutium. The weight of war tightened on my chest like an unyielding vice. It was there I resolved to persevere, to resist still when fate seemed to have turned against me. Far from the glories of old, surrounded by harsh mountains and steep valleys, I knew that refuge was the last stronghold I had left in Italy. The hopes I had nurtured for so long began to dissolve in the cold of those lands, yet I could not and would not give in. The presence of my other brother, Mago, a glimmer of comfort in these dark days, was also broken. His advance in Liguria was decisively halted. The young and determined Roman army, fierce and tireless, managed to close off all chances of reinforcement and alliance. The hope that Mago could bring reinforcements and new energy shattered like a wave against the cliffs. We had tried, in vain, to seek support even beyond the sea, among the kingdoms opposing Rome. An alliance with Philip V of Macedon could have represented a turning point. an anchor of salvation in a stormy sea. But fate decreed that the Roman fleet and army would intervene swiftly and decisively in Greece, stifling any hopes of aid. Macedonia proved to be a theater of political games and power struggles, but never true assistance for our cause. From 205 to 203 BC, I remained practically trapped in Brutium, like a wounded lion caught in its den. The land was hostile. My presence was a memory that still inspired fear, but was not enough to reverse the tide leading to defeat. I defended my last positions with a tenacity, perhaps fueled only by desperation. I could not allow the Romans to advance further, to destroy what little we still called ours. Locri, once a precious ally, fell under the blows of the Romans. I could not prevent it, and the pain of that loss felt like an open wound in my warrior's heart. Yet, despite this defeat, the Roman commanders, still fearful of my reputation, preferred not to risk a direct attack. They knew well that facing me would exact a high price, perhaps too high. This aura of fear that still surrounded me was the last trace of my strength. Then came the news that shattered every dream for good. Mago's failure in Liguria, and the victories of Publius Cornelius Scipio, now calling himself Africanus in Africa. My fate was sealed. Carthage, with cold pragmatism, ordered my return home. It was over. No matter how fiercely I had fought like a god in battle, my long campaign in Italy had to come to an end. In the autumn of 203 BC, I left the peninsula that had been the stage of my hopes, battles, and defeats for so many years. I took with me the most loyal veterans men who had shared my path and learned to fight with the same determination. Along with them, a small number of Italic volunteers, brave souls who had chosen to follow me to the end, against all odds. It was not a surrender, or at least I refuse to call it that. It was a strategic withdrawal, a necessary retreat, but inside, I knew that campaign had failed. The awareness of a shattered dream weighed heavily, like a stone on my heart. Yet, like every great Hellenistic commander, I wanted to leave a tangible mark of my endeavor. In 205 BC, 2 years before my final departure from Italy, I had an inscription cast in bronze at the Temple of Hera at Capo Lacinio. That text, written with pride and resolve, recounted my deeds on that foreign land, testified to my courage and indomitable spirit. It was a legacy, a memory carved in stone meant to remind all of Hannibal's passage through Italy, even if glory had not accompanied me to the end. That bronze was more than a mere inscription. It was a cry, a declaration of intent, a heritage I wished to leave to future generations. Despite everything, my story could not be erased. I had crossed mountains, defied legions, won impossible battles, and though my war ended on that soil, my figure was destined to remain alive. The weight of years and losses was immense, yet it never broke my spirit. The struggle had been harsh, the road rugged and often bloody, but I remained a commander until the very last moment. Staying in Brutium had been a difficult choice, but the only possible to keep fighting, to resist a fate that seemed already sealed. Now, as I gazed toward the horizon and the distant sea promised an uncertain return, I felt within me the awareness that I had done all I could. My battle had been against an empire that seemed invincible, and though I did not win, I had shown that even a single man with courage and cunning could challenge a colossus. I often reflect with a sort of bitter amazement on those 15 long years spent in Italy, 15 years of fighting, surviving, leading an army on enemy soil, surrounded by foes everywhere, yet always steadfast. It was not only my will that kept that flame alive. It was the strength of men, of peoples who had chosen to follow me despite fear, fatigue, and continual losses. Looking back on those years means reliving an unceasing battle not only on the field but within myself, in my mind and heart. When I crossed the Alps with my troops, few would have imagined we would remain so long in that land. The Romans, with their numerous and well-supplied legions, were a formidable adversary. The population, too, was often hostile. In their eyes, I was not a liberator, but an invader, a bringer of war and death. We had neither sufficient supplies nor adequate reinforcements from Carthage, and this added a heavy burden on my shoulders. How many times did I look at my men, hungry and worn by fatigue and cold, wondering how we could carry on. Yet, despite everything, we stayed. 15 years on Italian soil, in hostile territory, relentless, never surrendering. My mind, body, and soul were hammered by battles, sieges, ambushes, and constant skirmishes. Sometimes in great pitched battles with thousands of men arrayed on the field. Other times in small skirmishes, in continuous actions of attrition, movement, and war that seemed endless. But the hardest task, perhaps, was not fighting the Romans. It was keeping the army together, maintaining cohesion and loyalty among my troops. Every man under my command was a world unto himself. Mercenaries of different nationalities, cultures, languages, and ambitions. I had to learn to know each one, to earn their trust, to instill in them a purpose greater than mere survival. I knew well that a divided army dissolves, that loyalty is earned through respect and shared risks and victories. I shared with them the burden of grueling marches, the biting cold, hunger, fear, but also the clash of steel and the thrill of victory. Polybius, historian and witness of our age, called these years my greatest achievement, the ability to remain on the field relentlessly, surrounded by the enemy, without adequate resources, with almost continuous victories both in great battles and in small skirmishes. This is the harshest, and at the same time the greatest truth I have fought to tell through my actions. I did not always have the strength to mask my fatigue, the doubts that sometimes crept into my soul, but the duty to be the leader, to guide my men even when all seemed lost, was greater than any weariness. I could not afford to falter, because my fall would have meant the end of all hope for those who followed me. Yet, despite all difficulties, I never lost my dignity as a commander, nor the respect for those who fought by my side. The victories I won, whether small or great, were the fruit of incessant effort, a constant tension between mind and body, between strategy and courage. My name, although often told by the Romans with disdain or fear, remains etched in history as a symbol of resistance and military skill. It was not only the strength of arms, but the strength of spirit, the ability to lead men through a long and complex war, to maintain unity and loyalty under an increasingly threatening sky. This was my greatest feat. 15 years of struggle, blood, sweat, and sacrifices, not only for myself but for a higher ideal. And although the war brought destruction and pain, I know that what I have done will remain in the memory of those who can listen to the true voice of a man who challenged an empire and fought until his last breath with the courage and wisdom of a true commander. The return to my homeland, after so many years spent fighting far from Africa, was for me a moment full of conflicting emotions. Adrumetum, the land of my ancestors, which I had left young and impetuous, welcomed me with a sense of familiarity and at the same time unease. The fields, the cities, the people, everything seemed different. Yet something inside me remained rooted in that land I called home. It was not a simple homecoming. It was a return with the awareness that the war, the very war I had brought to the gates of Rome, now threatened my homeland, Carthage itself. The year 204 BC marked a new chapter, but this time the battle shifted to a terrain I knew well, where family ties, ancient alliances, and political grudges mingled at every step. Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, the young consul I had long feared, had arrived in Africa with an army of 25,000 men, determined to bring the war directly to the heart of our territory. Scipio was not only a skilled Roman general, he was also a man capable of forging new alliances, understanding the value of Numidian cavalry, which with its agility and ferocity could break our lines like a sharp sword. Thus, he allied himself with Massinissa, the Numidian king who had been wrongfully expelled from the throne by Syphax, our ally, and Massinissa's enemy. This political move by Scipio was a harsh blow. Massinissa brought with him a formidable cavalry, far better suited to the evolving tactics of war than the traditional Roman cavalry, which is heavier and less flexible. This kind of cavalry could move like the wind, strike swiftly, and vanish before the enemy could react. Carthage, exhausted by the long war, once again tried to save what remained through peace negotiations. But the young Scipio was determined and skillful. His victories against the forces of Hasdrubal and Syphax in consecutive battles marked a brutal and painful turning point for us. The war was drawing ever closer to our city, and the weight of the inevitable confrontation grew heavier by the day. Many were discouraged, worn down by the long war and the losses suffered. But I carried with me not only men and weapons, but also the pride and memory of the battles fought in Italy. My presence was like a spark that rekindled the morale of the people and the armies. The war party, which saw in me hope and determination, found new energy. I was given command of the available troops, a mix of inexperienced city militias, veterans hardened by the fires of the Italian campaigns, and mercenaries tough as nails. It was not easy to blend these diverse forces, each with its own history, motivation, and fears. But I knew that only unity could give us any chance of resisting Scipio. I gathered a total of 36,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and 80 elephants. The elephants, those imposing war creatures, were more than symbols of power. They were also a reminder of distant battles, a link to the very identity of our army. Their roar, their heavy steps, shook the ground and struck fear into our enemies. Every day we worked to strengthen the defenses, improve discipline, and prepare our army for what was to come. I knew the challenge before us was perhaps the hardest of all. Not to fight on foreign soil anymore, but to defend our very home. The weight of responsibility crushed me, but I could not show weakness. My men had to see in me a steady commander, a leader capable of guiding them to victory or to death with dignity. The tension was palpable. I felt it in the whispers of the city, in the tired faces of my men, in their eyes the fear, but also a fierce determination. They knew that Carthage's fate depended on us. For me, this responsibility was a heavy burden. I had spent years in Italy chasing a dream of victory against Rome, and now that dream seemed to slip away, forcing me into a defensive war in a land I loved, but which had become a theater of destruction and death. Yet, in those days at Adrumetum, amid the dust, the smoke of the fields, and the roar of military drills, I felt rekindled within me that flame which had guided every action of mine. The will to fight, to resist, to never surrender. Not just for myself, not merely for personal glory, but for Carthage, for my family, for all those who believed in a free and independent future. Returning to Africa was not the end of my journey, but a new beginning harder and more painful than any before. Yet I knew that as long as I had breath, a man under my command, and the trust of my people, I would fight. The year 202 BC loomed as the final act of a drama I had played out for 15 long years. The confrontation with Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, who had come to Africa with a well-prepared army and backed by the powerful Numidian cavalry of Massinissa, was the decisive moment. The peace negotiations, in which I had participated with perhaps naive but sincere hope, proved futile. The inevitable had now unfolded before us. I knew the clash would be fierce, perhaps more than any I had ever faced. The stakes were the life of Carthage, the fate of my people, and my very existence. Before me stood an efficient, well-trained Roman army, and a shrewd adversary who had honed his tactics over the years, learning from every battle past. Scipio was not merely a general. He was a man of steel, clear-headed and determined, an opponent I never underestimated. But I was no man to yield at the first obstacle. I had spent my life studying war, shaping my army, inventing tactics to break the Roman molds. On that day, on the field of Zama, I brought forth a bold, novel battle plan, one I hoped would be the key to putting the enemy legions in jeopardy. I arranged my forces in a formation that could shatter the Roman lines and allow me to exploit every resource at my disposal, even at the risk of everything. When the battle began, the earth seemed to tremble beneath the soldiers' steps. The clangor of arms echoed like endless thunder. My men fought with fierce courage, knowing this battle would decide their fate. I saw the fire in their eyes, that determination only those with everything to lose can show. Every move, every command was calculated with utmost care. Yet, I felt inside me the tension of one who knows fate hangs by the thinnest thread. My new strategy initially threw the Roman ranks into confusion. My troops broke through some lines, making the enemy's order falter, and for a moment victory seemed within reach. My heart filled with vibrant hope, the dream of a great triumph that would redeem Carthage and myself. It was then that I ordered the intervention of my veteran reserves. Men forged in years of battle, loyal to their commander unto their last breath. They charged into the fray, breathing new life into our assault. But it was not enough. The Numidian cavalry of Massinissa, agile and relentless, struck with decisive force just as the battle still seemed poised to turn in our favor. Their charge was like a storm that swept away our lines. My men, weary and wounded, faced an enemy that surrounded and struck them without mercy. I saw comrades, friends, brothers in arms fall beneath that impetuous ride. I felt the pain of defeat, a pain burning deeper than any wound. In the end, Scipio's victory was complete. It was a blow that no one could have avoided. My army fell apart. Few survivors remained. I was forced to flee, to abandon the battlefield, and to take refuge in Adrumetum with only a handful of men left by my side. The bitterness I felt was immense, but remorse gave me no respite. I knew I had done everything that was humanly possible. However, the flight was marked by betrayals and deceit. I was ambushed by the Numidians, the very same who had fled the clash with the commander. It was a cruel blow, a further wound inflicted by those who should have been my allies, or at least worthy and honest opponents. That betrayal hurt more than the enemy's sword, because it struck at trust and honor, two elements I have always considered fundamental in war and in life. The Battle of Zama ended our resistance and marked the conclusion of the Second Punic War. But I, Hannibal, was not a man who gave up easily. Despite the defeat, I could not help but recognize Scipio's skill and at the same time feel the depth of my pain and frustration. It was not just a military defeat. It was the end of a dream, a long struggle for the freedom and glory of Carthage. At 46 years old, I still carried within me the fire of youth and ambition. I was not only a commander, the lightning bolt hurled against Rome on the fields of Italy and Africa, but also a statesman capable of looking beyond the battle, of attempting to rebuild what war had overturned. After years of political obscurity, away from the center of power, in 195 BC I returned to sit on the throne of Carthage's government as Sophete, the head of government. This title, once rich with prestige, was by then hollowed out, a shadow of what it had been, but I restored to it vigor, authority, and meaning. My first act was a direct attack on that powerful stronghold of Carthaginian oligarchy, the Council of 100. This body, entrenched in lifelong and perpetual privileges, was the symbol of a closed power, a system that stifled any hope of renewal. I could no longer tolerate that small circle of men deciding the fate of Carthage as if it were their personal fief. By restoring the council membership to an annual term renewable, certainly, but no longer eternal, I wanted to give back to the people and the institutions the breath of democracy and oversight they deserved. It was a harsh blow to those accustomed to seeing power as a family inheritance, an inalienable right. In those same years, I did not forget the land. The lands I had known as a boy, those rich and generous fields of Byzacena in that fertile region now at the heart of Tunisia. There, with my veterans, the survivors of many battles, I undertook a path of rebirth. I employed them in agriculture, a hard but honorable work, because I knew that from the land could arise again Carthage's vigor, the lifeblood of our economy, now grievously wounded by war and the loss of control over trade routes. It was a difficult time. The Carthaginian economy had lost much of its income from maritime trade, once our main strength. Yet, despite the deprivation, Specialized agriculture was taking root like a stubborn sprout, breaking through even the hardest asphalt. Work in the fields, care for the earth, careful and skillful cultivation, all of this was awakening a new hope, a possible future. It was an anchor of salvation I wished to see solid, because I knew Carthage could not live on memories and past glories alone. But my work as a reformer did not stop at agriculture. I also attempted a reform of the state aimed at increasing tax revenues, to breathe new life into the public coffers, and finance the rebirth of our city and defend it against any new dangers. It was a daunting undertaking. The oligarchy, the same ruling class I had challenged by reducing the power of the Council of 100, showed hostility, jealousy, and readiness to sabotage every attempt I made. I still carry the bitterness of those days when I was accused of treason, of having betrayed the very interests of Carthage itself. It was a deep wound, not so much because of the accusations themselves, but because they came from those who should have supported and protected our city, not betrayed it. They accused me of failing to strike Rome when I had the chance during the campaign in Italy, of letting the enemy escape without delivering the killing blow, of wasting an opportunity that could have changed Carthage's fate forever. These accusations, spoken quietly and with eyes full of suspicion, were not merely political slanders, but a poison aimed at weakening my reputation and my work in the eyes of Rome, our fiercest enemies. I felt betrayed by many whom I had considered allies, by those who should have shared with me the will to renew and strengthen Carthage. Yet, despite everything, I did not yield. I remained steadfast in my purpose, strengthened by the awareness that my vision was right, that the rebirth of our people would require sacrifices and profound changes. Power and the prestige of a title are not enough, unless one has the courage to use them to fight injustice and open new paths. During long nights, when silence wrapped around my house and my thoughts became persistent companions, I reflected on all I had lived through and on what was still to come. I wondered how difficult it was to be a statesman after being a commander. War had tempered my spirit. It had taught me the art of strategy and endurance, but politics demanded other weapons, other skills, patience, the ability to mediate, the strength to carry forward an invisible battle made of words, fragile alliances, suspicions and intrigues. And yet, despite everything, I found a certain dignity even in this new struggle. Because I knew that if Carthage was to rise again from its ashes, an army alone would not be enough. Strong, just institutions were needed, a people united and aware of their destiny. And I, Hannibal, did not want to be only the warrior who had challenged Rome on its own soil. I wanted also to be the one who tried to forge a better future for my people. That era was a test of my will and my patience. Despite the accusations, denunciations, and obstacles put in my path by those who saw me as an internal enemy, I continued to work with the same determination I had shown on the battlefields. I worked to renew, to build, to give our city the tools to become great again, even if far from its former glory. Many remember me only as the feared and respected warrior, but I wanted to be known also about the man who fought for the peace and prosperity of Carthage, who tried to restore balance and offer hope to a tired and wounded people. This, more than anything else, is the legacy I would like to leave behind. And so, between the toil of the fields, the battles in the halls of government, the long discussions with those who refuse to see change, those difficult years passed. But inside me always burned the conviction that nothing would be in vain, that every sacrifice, every struggle, every apparent defeat was only a step toward a future that, perhaps one day, someone would truly see and appreciate. I chose the silence of exile, a choice that weighed like a stone on my heart, but one I felt necessary to preserve at least a glimmer of dignity and hope in a world that had now turned its back on me. Far from Carthage, from my land, from the people I loved, I set out toward an uncertain destiny, determined not to fall prisoner to the Romans, my eternal enemies. The first stop was Tyre, that mother city which, despite its greatness, could no longer offer me a safe refuge. From there, I sailed to Ephesus, to the court of Antiochus III, king of the Seleucids, who was preparing to wage war against Rome. As soon as I arrived at his court, I saw clearly the real state of affairs. The Syrian army, though numerous and proud, could never compete with the Roman war machine, built on discipline and superior logistics. I therefore advised Antiochus not to face Rome in a pitched battle, but rather to pursue a war of movement, building a fleet and bringing an army into southern Italy, where I had left deep marks and knew the terrain and customs. I offered my experience and command, convinced that only this way could we put Rome in difficulty on its own soil. But Antiochus, blinded by the flattery of his courtiers and his own arrogance, chose to ignore my advice. He relegated me to secondary roles, such as commander of the Phoenician fleet in 190 BC, a titular position without substance or influence. The battle at the mouth of the Eurymedon was a defeat that still scars me inside because my fame, my worth, had been overshadowed by politics and fear, no longer by the judgment of war. At Ephesus, I even had the chance to listen to the peripatetic philosopher Phormio speak about the art of war before an enraptured audience. Many worshipped him, but I knew the truth. I recall saying, with the bitter irony of one who has seen death's jaws in battle, that I had never met a more foolish and delirious old man. How could he teach me about war when he had never seen an enemy, a camp, or a battlefield? His rhetoric was vain, his words empty as an echo in a cave. From that hostile and suspicious court, almost ready to hand me over to the Romans as a cowardly prize, I fled under cover of night, boarding a ship bound for Crete. The Cretans tried to detain me, demanding as a pledge the gold I carried as a votive offering to their temple. But I, who had learned the art of deception and strategy as well as that of war, accepted with a cold smile. I seemingly handed over a load of gold, but in reality it was iron covered with a thin layer of gold. The real gold, instead, I hid by melting it into bars concealed inside precious statues, works of art that always accompanied me and which the Cretans, enchanted by their beauty, allowed me to take away. Almost immediately, I left Crete and moved again toward Asia Minor, an exile without peace, but one I refused to accept as a final defeat. I sought refuge in the distant kingdom of Armenia under Artaxias I. Here, though far from my land and the roar of battle, I found a new role, a different purpose for my existence, that of urban planner and advisor. I suggested to Artaxias to build a new city on those wild and still uncultivated lands near the Mesamor River, at the foot of the majestic Ararat. The city took the name Artaxata, and I passionately engaged in directing the works, striving to imprint in those stones and streets a mark of my work and my ingenuity, a legacy that transcended my image as a commander. I did not stop there. I moved westward to Prusias, king of Bithynia. Here, too, I left a lasting trace, contributing to the founding of the city of Prusa, which over time would become Bursa, the first capital of an empire I could not yet imagine. This was my new battle, no longer fought with swords and spears, but with stones, walls, and culture. Yet, the long hand of Rome still reached me. According to Nepos, a Bithynian envoy mistakenly informed the Roman victor Titus Quinctius Flamininus of my presence. Rome, which neither forgot nor forgave, sent its messenger to demand my surrender. My host, King Prusias, tried to avoid conflict but eventually gave in. But I, once again, refused to fall alive into the hands of those who had persecuted and exiled me all my life. At Libissa, on the eastern shores of the Sea of Marmara, I took the poison I had carefully kept, determined never to become a Roman trophy. I recall thinking of the words of the oracle from my youth, who had foretold my death in Libya, in the heart of my land. Strange fate the reality had mocked those words. A clod of Libyan earth will cover your bones. Yet that place was far from home, far from the Mediterranean I had crossed 1,000 times. My last words, spoken with the thread of bitter sarcasm that had accompanied me all my life, were, "How much the Romans have changed. Especially in their customs, they no longer even have the patience to wait for an old man's death. Come on, then, let us free them from this long suffering." And so, with a final act of will, I broke the thread that still bound me to this world. But I know that my name, my story, will live forever in the hearts of those who understand that the true battle is not only the one fought with weapons, but also that of remaining true to oneself until the very end.